Welcome back to another Final Cut Pro X tutorial. Today I'm going to show you how to slow down a clip. So you see this clip here. This is 100% normal motion. And then I just take the clip. I go over here, I click this, slow. I can choose 50%, 25, or 10, and I speed it up the same way. The other ones like reverse clip, automatic speed, speed ramp, they also do different speed things, and you should check them out. Or you can pick custom if you just want to change it. Things that pop up right here where it's like normal, slow, fast, custom. Normally you want to pick custom. If you want 80%, boom, or 50%, or 40%. Now it's extremely simple to change it, but you'll notice if I go to 25%, it's extremely choppy right there. You can see it right there where it's choppy, and it doesn't look as smooth as it does in 40%. I'm going to show you the math behind it and how you can know the perfect way to do it. So as right now, I actually filmed this in 60 frames per second. I know it says 24 frames per second or 24p, but I filmed it in 60 frames per second. So if I go over here to my math on my sticky notes, the normal movie frame rate is 24 frames per second, and I filmed it in 60 frames per second. So if I divide 24 by the 60 frames per second that I did, I get 40%. So it's actually not 40% slower. It's 40% of the speed of the original clip. So if I filmed it at like 24 frames per second, no, I filmed it at 30 frames per second, but I wanted it at 24 frames per second, I'd do it like this, and I'd get 80%, which is another example. That's 80% of the original clip, which I can do with both of these because I filmed it in 60 frames per second. So when you put in 80% right there, you'll notice that it is just a little bit faster than, say, 50%. And that's because it's 80% of the speed of the other one. It's not 80% slower. 80% slower would actually be more like 20%. That's 80% slower, and it's 20% the speed. So that's easier to clear it up if you think of it like that, where it's 40% of the speed. Now, when I go in here and I divide, you can see that 40% would make it as if it was actually normal movie frame rate. So that makes it perfect. And if I filmed it in 30 frames per second, I could slow it down to 80%. But if I did something like 24 frames per second divided by 24 frames per second, then it would leave it at 1 or 100% speed. So I'd have to leave it there. And if I did slow it down, which you can for effect, it would be even slower. So to show that as an example, this is 40% slower. So if I was to go any slower than 40%, it would be like going past the 100% of 24 frames per second divided by 24 frames per second. So it would look extremely choppy, which you can see that the frames aren't, it's like it's jump cutting, it's like, and it's even worse in 10 frames per second. Now if you had something that could actually film in slow motion, like for example, if you did 24 frames per second divided by 120 frames per second, or 24 frames per second divided by, I don't know, 240 frames per second. If you actually had slow motion cameras, which 60 frames is common, then you could go even slower. You would go 24 divided by 120, and you'd get 20%. That's how slow it would be. 20% of the video, and it would look like normal movie frame rate. If you did 24 frames per second divided by 240, you could go 10%, and it would look like a normal movie frame rate, and that's called slow motion camera. And so that's how you get slow motion in Final Cut Pro, and that's the math behind it, so you can know what you're supposed to slow it down to make it look more natural. I hope this tutorial helped, and if it did, be sure to subscribe, like, comment, suggest any other tutorials, and thanks for watching.